My name is Hailey. I'm 26 years old, and to my family, I'm a total failure. Last night, my mom laughed in my face and called me useless in front of everyone, but she has no idea that I'm the one secretly keeping this family from falling apart. The scent of truffle oil and aged steak usually made my mouth water, but tonight it felt like lead in my stomach. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table at Le Vela, my fingers tracing the condensation on my water glass. The restaurant was the kind of place where the waiters moved like ghosts and the silverware cost more than my monthly rent, at least the rent my mother thought I paid. "A toast," my mother, Diane, announced. She stood at the head of the table, her blonde hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. She raised a crystal flute of vintage champagne, the diamonds on her fingers catching the soft amber glow of the chandelier. "To Blake," she said, beaming at my brother, "our youngest senior associate at the firm, 28 and already making partner look like child's play." Blake gave a humble, practiced shrug, though his chest puffed out under his tailored suit. "Just doing the work, Mom." "And to Chloe," Diane continued, turning her radiant smile toward my sister, "for organizing the most exquisite gala the Children's Hospital has ever seen, and of course for making us all so proud with that beautiful new estate in Greenwich." Chloe leaned into her husband, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of a country club brochure. "It's only 6 bedrooms, Mom, hardly a palace." The table erupted in light, melodic laughter. I stayed silent, taking a small sip of water. I wore a simple navy wrap dress, one I'd bought 3 years ago. To them, I was the quiet one, the one who worked a stable administrative job at a mid-sized logistics firm. Diane's eyes finally landed on me. The warmth in them didn't just fade, it vanished, replaced by a sort of polished pity. "And to Hailey," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "who arrived almost on time tonight. We're all still waiting for Hailey to find her spark, aren't we?" "I've been working on a project, Mom. It's been taking up a lot of my—" She cut me off with a sharp, high-pitched laugh that turned heads at the neighboring tables. It wasn't a laugh of joy, it was a weapon. "A project, honey? You can barely manage a desk job. You've always been the dreamer, but let's be honest." She leaned forward, the candlelight flickering in her cold eyes. "How does it feel to be the only useless one in a family of high achievers?" The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the blood rush to my ears, a hot, prickling heat. Blake looked down at his steak. Chloe adjusted her pearl necklace, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. No one defended me. I looked at my mother, the woman who valued the logo on a handbag more than the character of her daughter. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just felt a strange, icy clarity settle over me. "I'm not useless, Mom," I said, my voice steady though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Of course not, dear," she said, waving a hand as if dismissing a fly. "Now, waiter, another bottle of the Cristal, please." I looked down at my plate. They had no idea that the desk job ended 2 years ago. They had no idea that while they were sipping champagne, I was building an empire. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and resentment. I parked my beat-up sedan, a 2014 model with a temperamental heater, outside my modest apartment complex in a neighborhood that Diane would describe as transitioning. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs, the wood creaking under my feet. Inside, my apartment was exactly what I allowed my family to see: a small kitchenette, a thrifted sofa, and a bookshelf filled with paperbacks. It was the perfect stage for the role of the struggling daughter. But in the corner of the living room sat a heavy, locked steel door that led to what used to be a walk-in closet. I pressed my thumb to the biometric scanner hidden under the doorframe. With a soft hiss, the lock disengaged. I stepped inside, and the atmosphere changed instantly. This wasn't a closet. It was a high-tech command center. 3 32-inch monitors bathed the room in a cool blue glow. A custom-built server hummed like a purring cat in the corner. I sat down, the ergonomic chair molding to my back, and woke the screens. Thousands of data points scrolled by, logistics routes, shipping manifests, and real-time GPS tracking for a fleet of over 500 long-haul trucks. This was Vela, my company. To the business world, I was H.L. Miller, the reclusive founder who preferred encrypted emails and video calls with the camera off. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus, my COO. The deal for the expansion is ready for your signature, HL. We're officially the largest independent logistics provider in the tri-state area. Dinner go okay? I stared at the screen. How does it feel to be useless? My mother's voice echoed in my head. I typed back, dinner was a reminder of why we do this. Send the papers. I'm signing tonight. I spent the next 4 hours buried in spreadsheets and contract clauses. This was where I was truly alive. While my sister Chloe was busy picking out marble for her foyer and Blake was billing hours to wealthy clients, I was solving the last mile problem for global shipping. I'd started Vela with a small inheritance from my grandmother, the only woman in the family who saw through Diane's vanity, and a mountain of coding knowledge I'd taught myself in secret. I knew if Diane found out, she would try to claw her way into the boardroom, using my success to bolster her own social standing. Or worse, she'd find a way to take credit for it. Keeping it a secret wasn't just about privacy, it was about survival. Around 2 a.m., my personal phone chirped. A text from Blake. Hey, Hales. Sorry about Diane tonight. She was on a tear. Listen, are you around tomorrow? I need to ask you something. Just between us. I frowned. Marcus never reached out unless he wanted something, and he certainly never apologized for Diane. I looked at my monitors, the glowing evidence of my power, and then at the cheap, chipped coffee mug on my desk. The cracks in the perfect family were starting to show. I could smell the desperation through the screen. The Diner 24 smelled of burnt coffee and floor cleaner that didn't quite mask the scent of old grease. It was the kind of place Blake usually avoided unless he was doing pro bono work or lost a bet. I watched him through the window before I went in. He was sitting in a corner booth, his $2,000 suit looking absurd against the cracked vinyl seating. He kept checking his watch, a heavy gold piece that could have paid for a year of my admin salary. I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling like a warning. Hailey, he said, standing up. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that his expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. Thanks for coming. Sure, Blake. You sounded urgent. Is Mom okay? I slid into the booth, the springs groaning beneath me. Mom's fine. She's Mom, he said, rubbing his face. He didn't order food. He just stared at the scarred laminate table. Hales, I'm in a hole. A big one. I tilted my head, playing the part. What do you mean? You're the star of the firm. You just got that promotion. Blake leaned in, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. It's a malpractice suit. A big client. Someone I should have double-checked. I took a shortcut, Hailey. I thought I could handle it, but the firm is distancing itself. If this goes to court, I'm disbarred. If I settle quietly, I need $200,000 by the end of the month. I felt a cold prickle of shock, not for him, but for the irony. The golden boy was a fraud. 200,000? I breathed, my voice pitched with just the right amount of struggling sister panic. Blake, I don't even have 2,000 in my savings. I know, he said, waving a hand dismissively. I'm not asking you for the money. I know you know. I'm asking you to talk to Chloe. She won't listen to me. She thinks I'm just being dramatic. But she's got the Mercer Trust. If she could just bridge the gap. Why don't you ask Mom?" Blake let out a dry, bitter laugh that sounded like sandpaper. "Mom? If she knew her perfect son was a liability, she'd scrub me from the family photos before I could finish the sentence. You know how she is, Hailey. Everything is about the image. If the image cracks, she throws the whole thing away." I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't the powerful lawyer I'd grown up envying. He was a terrified boy hiding behind a silk tie. "I'll talk to her," I lied. I knew Chloe wouldn't give him a dime. She was too busy trying to keep her own head above water. My investigators at Vela had already flagged her husband's investment firm for some very suspicious irregularities. "Thanks, Hales," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. For a second, he looked relieved. "You're a good sister. A bit of a mess, sure, but you've got a good heart." Even when he was begging for help, he couldn't help but dig at me. A bit of a mess. I watched him walk out to his silver Porsche, his shoulders straightening the moment he hit the sidewalk, putting the mask back on. I stayed in the booth, the cold coffee in front of me forgotten. The house of cards wasn't just wobbling, the foundation was rotting, and my mother, the architect of it all, was still upstairs laughing at the useless daughter who was currently the only one with a solid floor beneath her feet. I pulled out my work phone, the encrypted one. "Marcus," I said when he picked up, "start looking into the Mercer Trust and Chloe's husband's offshore accounts. I want to know exactly how much water that ship is taking on."
Chloe's palace in Greenwich looked like a page torn from a luxury home magazine, but the air inside was thick with the scent of expensive lavender candles and something sour, the smell of a panic attack. When Chloe opened the door, she wasn't the manicured socialite from the Dala. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot, and her silk blouse had a faint wine stain near the collar. She didn't invite me in so much as she pulled me inside and locked the door behind us. "Did Blake talk to you?" she hissed, her eyes darting to the floor-to-ceiling windows as if creditors were perched in the manicured hedges. "He mentioned he was having some trouble, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice soft, the dutiful, concerned sister. "He thought you could help him." Chloe let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. She paced the foyer, her heels clicking like gunfire on the white marble. "Help him? Hailey, James hasn't made a mortgage payment in 3 months. The investment firm is a hollowed-out shell. The feds were asking questions about his offshore accounts last week." She stopped and looked at me, her face pale. "We're bankrupt, Hailey. If Mom finds out we're losing the house, she'll have a stroke. Or worse, she'll tell everyone it's our fault for being reckless. You have to talk to Blake. Tell him there is no money." "I think you should both just tell her the truth," I suggested. Chloe gripped my shoulders, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "No, you don't understand. Mom's entire identity is built on us being perfect. If we fail, she has nothing. You're used to being, well, the way you are. You don't have a reputation to protect, but we do." The way you are. The words stung, even though I knew the truth. To them, I was a safety net made of thin air, someone they could vent to because I was too low status to be a threat. "I'll see what I can do," I muttered. 2 days later, the family meeting was called. We weren't at a restaurant this time. We were at Oakridge, the family's ancestral estate. It was a sprawling Victorian house with a wraparound porch and a history that Diane wore like a crown. The house smelled of lemon wax and old money. Diane sat in her favorite wing-back chair, sipping tea from a bone china cup. Blake and Chloe sat on the sofa, looking like they were waiting for a firing squad. "I've made a decision," Diane announced, her voice regal. "I'm selling Oakridge." Blake gasped. "Mom, you can't. This house has been in the family for 3 generations." "It's a matter of taste," Diane said, though I noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she set her teacup down. "I'm tired of the upkeep. It's a burden. I want something modern, something more suited to my status." I knew the lie immediately. I'd seen the internal reports on the local real estate market. Diane wasn't selling because she was tired. She was selling because the property taxes were 3 years overdue and the bank was circling. She was out of cash, likely from subsidizing Blake's lifestyle and Chloe's social climbing. She stopped and looked at me, her face pale. And Hailey, dear, this means you'll finally have to stand on your own 2 feet. No more coming home for holidays to a house you couldn't possibly afford to visit otherwise. I suggest you find a roommate for that little apartment of yours. There won't be an inheritance to catch you when you finally fall. She looked at her successful children for support, but Blake was staring at his shoes, and Chloe was biting her lips so hard it bled. They were all drowning, and Diane was the only one still trying to pretend she was on a yacht. "I understand, Mom," I said, my heart cold and steady. "I'll make my own arrangements." I walked out of that house knowing exactly what my next move would be. It was time for Vela to make an acquisition.
The morning after the meeting at Oakridge, the world felt different. I stood on my small balcony, watching the city wake up. Below, people were rushing to jobs they likely hated, worried about bills and the opinions of others. For years, I had lived in that same cage of anxiety, terrified that my mother's low opinion of me was a universal truth. No more. I stepped back inside and entered my closet office. The hum of the servers felt like a heartbeat. I opened a secure line to Marcus. "Is the shell company ready?" I asked, my voice devoid of the hesitation I used with my family. "Everything is in place, HL. Summit Ridge Holdings is fully funded and anonymous. We've already contacted the listing agent for Oakridge. Your mother's lawyer is practically salivating. Apparently, they need a fast closing, like yesterday fast." "Good," I said, leaning back and watching the digital clock on my wall. "Offer 20% above the asking price, cash. On one condition, the closing happens in person at the house and the buyer's principal must be present to sign." "That's a bit unusual for a corporate acquisition, but for that much cash, they won't blink," Marcus said. I could hear the smile in his voice. "Are you sure you want to do this, Hailey? It's a lot of capital tied up in a house you used to hate." "I don't hate the house, Marcus. I hate the way it was used as a yardstick for my worth. I'm not just buying a building, I'm buying the narrative." Over the next 2 weeks, I played my part to perfection. I took the bus to a job interview for a position I didn't want, making sure to mention it in the family group chat. Blake's replies were frantic. "Good luck, Hales. Hey, did you talk to Chloe? I really need that bridge loan." Chloe's replies were colder. "Glad you're trying, Hailey. We're all very stressed right now. The house is under contract, but James and I are transitioning." Transitioning was a nice way of saying they were being evicted from their luxury lifestyle. I drove past Oakridge a few days before the closing. A massive "sold" banner was draped across the realtor's sign. My mother was standing on the porch wearing a crisp white linen suit, pointing at a rose bush and giving instructions to a gardener she probably couldn't afford to pay. Even as her world crumbled, she was curating the image of a successful matriarch moving on to bigger and better things. She looked up and saw my old sedan idling at the gate. She didn't wave, she just shook her head and turned back to her roses, the very picture of disappointed grace. I felt a surge of adrenaline. She thought I was there to mourn the loss of my childhood home. She thought I was there to beg for a place to stay. I put the car in gear and drove away. In my passenger seat was a leather briefcase containing the articles of incorporation for Vela, a certified check for the remaining balance of the estate, and the power of attorney for Summit Ridge Holdings. The stage was set. The useless daughter was about to take her seat at the head of the table. The morning of the closing, I didn't reach for the navy wrap dress or the scuffed flats. I opened the hidden compartment in the back of my closet, the one Diane had never seen. I pulled out a charcoal gray power suit, tailored so sharply the lines felt like blades. I stepped into a pair of black stilettos that added 3 inches to my height and a world of confidence to my stride. I looked in the mirror. For the first time, Hailey the useless and H.L. Miller the CEO were the same person. I didn't look like a dreamer anymore. I looked like the person who signed the checks. I didn't drive my old sedan. I had a car service pick me up, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. My lead counsel, Sarah, and my financial advisor, David, were already inside, their laptops open, their faces set in professional masks. "Are you ready, Hailey?" Sarah asked, adjusting her glasses. "Once we sign these, the title transfers immediately. You'll be the sole owner of the estate and the debt holder for your siblings' personal liabilities." "I've been ready for 3 years," I said, watching the familiar trees of my childhood zip past the window. When we pulled into the gravel driveway of Oakridge, I saw Blake's Porsche and Chloe's SUV parked haphazardly near the entrance. My mother was standing by the front door, checking her reflection in a compact mirror. She looked stressed, her movements jerky. To her, this was the day she escaped her debts. She didn't realize she was just changing jailers. We stepped out of the car. The sound of the SUV doors closing echoed like a gavel. "Hailey?" I looked up. Blake was standing on the porch, squinting at me. He didn't recognize me at first. Not in this suit, not with this look in my eyes. "What are you doing here? And who are these people?" "I'm here for the closing, Blake," I said, my voice projecting with a calm authority that stopped him in his tracks. Diane stepped forward, her face contorting into a mask of confusion and irritation. "Hailey, for heaven's sake, this is a private business matter. We are meeting with the principals of Summit Ridge. You can't just show up here dressed like that and expect to—" "I am the principal of Summit Ridge, Mom," I said, walking past her and into the foyer. The silence that followed was absolute. I walked to the heavy oak dining table, the same table where she had called me useless only weeks before. Sarah and David took their seats on either side of me, opening their briefcases with synchronized clicks. Chloe walked in from the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand, despite it being 11 in the morning. She stopped dead, her eyes bugging out. "Hailey, why are you sitting in the buyer's chair?" "Because I'm the buyer," I said, sliding a folder across the table toward my mother. "Please, sit down. We have a lot of paperwork to get through, and I have a board meeting at 2. Diane didn't sit. Her gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles turning white. "This is a joke, a cruel, pathetic joke. You work in an office, Hailey. You file papers. You don't buy estates." "I haven't worked that job in years, Mom," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "I built Vela. I am H.L. Miller, and right now, I'm the only reason you're not going to be featured in the foreclosures section of the Sunday paper." Blake sank into a chair, his face pale. "You are Miller? The logistics startup? I've been trying to get a meeting with your legal team for months." "I know, and I denied every request." The air in the room felt heavy, charged with this sudden shift in gravity. The power hadn't just been shifted, it had been demolished and rebuilt in my image. The rustle of legal bond paper was the only sound in the room. Sarah began laying out the documents, her movements precise and clinical. My mother finally sank into her chair, but she didn't look defeated yet. She looked like she was trying to calculate a new angle. "Hailey, honey," Diane began, her voice fluttering with a sudden, sickening sweetness. "If you were doing so well, why didn't you say something? We could have helped you. We could have expanded together." "You wouldn't have helped me, Mom. You would have managed me," I said, my voice as cold as the marble floor. You would have told me my branding was too drab or that I wasn't networking with the right people. I succeeded because I kept you far away from my vision. I turned to my siblings. Blake was staring at the table, his hands trembling. Chloe looked like she wanted to vomit. Sarah, I nodded. Sarah slid 2 separate folders toward Blake and Chloe. In addition to the purchase of Oakridge, Summit Ridge Holdings has acquired the distressed debt of Mr. Blake's legal liabilities and the outstanding arrears on Mrs. Chloe's personal property. The room went ice cold. What does that mean? Diane demanded, her eyes darting between them. Blake? Chloe? What is she talking about? It means they're broke, Mom, I said simply. Blake is facing disbarment for a shortcut he took to keep up appearances. Chloe and James haven't owned that palace in Greenwich for months. They've been squatting on borrowed time and unpaid taxes. Diane turned to Blake, her face flushing a deep, angry red. Is this true? You? The senior associate? The golden boy? Blake didn't look up. I needed the money, Mom. The lifestyle, the Porsche. You always talked about how important it was to look the part. And you, hissed Diane at Chloe, the galas, the Greenwich estate? It was all a lie, Mom, Chloe snapped, her voice breaking into a sob. We were drowning trying to be what you wanted us to be. We were terrified you'd call us what you call Hailey. The word hung in the air. Useless. Diane looked back at me, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Her carefully constructed world of status and high achievers had just imploded, leaving only me, the daughter she'd spent a lifetime dismissing, standing in the wreckage. You bought their debt? Diane whispered. Why? Because, unlike you, I actually care what happens to this family, but that care comes with conditions. You wanted to sell this house because you were broke. Well, it's sold. The debts are settled. But from this moment on, the useless daughter sets the rules. I leaned forward, the heavy oak table pressing against my palms. You're not moving into a modern condo, Mom. You're staying here, in this house you love so much. But the staff is gone, the luxury budget is gone. You'll live on a monthly allowance that I provide. And Blake, Chloe, you both start over. No more pretending. You can't do this, Diane breathed, though there was no fire left in her. I already have, I said, picking up the silver fountain pen. Sign the papers, Mom. Save your children's reputations or let them fall. It's your choice. With a hand that shook violently, Diane took the pen. I watched as she signed away her power, one stroke at a time. The scratching of the pen on the final page sounded like a long, slow exhale. When my mother finally pulled the nib away, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. The diamonds on her fingers seemed like glass trinkets against the backdrop of the reality she had just signed into existence. It's done, I said, sliding the papers back into Sarah's folder. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and looked around the room. For 26 years, this house had felt like a courtroom where I was always the defendant. Now, it was just a building. A beautiful, drafty Victorian building that I owned, lock, stock, and barrel. What happens now? Chloe asked. She was wiping her eyes with a silk napkin, her makeup smudged. She looked younger, more human, without the mask of perfection. Now, we learn the value of things, not just the price, I said. Blake, my legal team will oversee your settlement. You'll keep your license, but you'll be working at a public defender's office for the next 3 years to pay back the loan I just gave you. You need to remember why you became a lawyer in the first place. Blake nodded, his head low. I think I'd actually prefer that to looking over my shoulder every day. And Chloe, I turned to my sister, the Greenwich house is gone. You and James can move into the guest cottage here. It's small, but it's rent-free. You're going to help Mom manage this estate without the staff. No more galas, no more fake investments." Diane looked up, her eyes watery and sharp all at once. "And you, Hailey? I suppose you'll be moving in here, taking the master suite to gloat." I walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling green lawn and the oak trees that had seen 3 generations of my family's secrets. I felt the cool air from the old glass pane against my forehead. "No, Mom," I said, turning back to face her. "I have my own life, a real one. I'm keeping my modest apartment. It reminds me of who I am when I don't have a name to hide behind." I walked toward the door, my heels clicking firmly on the hardwood. I stopped at the threshold and looked back one last time. My mother was sitting at the head of the table, clutching her teacup like a life preserver. "You asked me how it felt to be useless, Mom. The truth is, I never was. I was just the only one who didn't need a golden pedestal to stand on." I walked out the front door and down the porch steps. The late afternoon sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. My driver held the door of the SUV open for me. As we pulled away, I looked out the rear window. The sold sign was still there, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a release. I pulled out my work phone. A notification popped up. Vela had just been featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The headline read, "The Quiet Giant, How H.L. Miller Revolutionized Logistics." I smiled, deleted the notification, and turned the phone off. I didn't need the headlines anymore. I didn't need the suit, and I certainly didn't need my mother's approval. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the daughter, the admin, or the secret CEO. I was just Hailey, and that was more than enough.